this is Dragon Veils. Welcome back to my channel, and this time around we are going to do a top 10 best Chaotic Season 1 episodes. So for some of you who don't know what Chaotic is an animated cartoon from early 2000s to basically the 2010s. I was very lucky enough to actually see this show the first time round, and it started off as a Dutch trading game or trading card game, and then it evolved into becoming a show with Canadian style animation added into the mix, and it was part of a 4Kids TV program. This show focuses on a young group of kids, mostly led by Tom Majors, who is an overworld player, and it comprises of 4 tribes: Overworlder, Underworlder, Danian, and Mepedian. And then later on in Season 2, it also includes the elusive Marillions. But for this one, I'm going to focus more on the 4 tribes in general, because in Season 1, that's what most of the story will be focusing on. And for this list, I'm going to focus on the episodes that either do great introductions of specific characters or they give off a very good plot points throughout Season 1 of Chaotic. And this is also done through some serious flash animation before Season 2 decided to amp things up with cellular animation that carried on into Season 3. So without further ado, let's begin to look into these episodes, and oh yes, beware of the usual spoilers. There are 2 reasons why that this is number 10 on the list. With Unexpected, we're introduced to 2 beloved characters in the Chaotic franchise. Hearing the tiny long-eared underworlder that's based off of a bunny rabbit, believe it or not, and Kaz's loyal sidekick slash friend, especially who has a very interesting taste in a bargaining chip. And then there is also Peyton, the future friend of Tom and also a Mepedian player. This is also where we're introduced to the Mepedian tribe, where basically lizard-like people who have a power to turn invisible at will. So, in a lot of ways, this definitely comes off as an interesting concept of that not everything is what it seems. And it shows some of Kat's capability of handling situations in Param, even if it means trying to put hearing roped into that situation. And it does give an introductions to how creatures work in Chaotic in general. And as for Peyton, it highlights his character, that he can be a little standoffish and make people uncomfortable at times, but he really is a good guy at heart, and he wants nothing more than to actually do his chaotic battles his way, but not brag about strategy too much. He really is a good guy, even if he is a bit strange. Chaotic Crisis is just an episode that's a good time, really crazy, but in a good way, and it does help explore a what if possibility, like what if the creatures managed to go to Chaotic? What if they also managed to get to Earth? And what would Kaz be doing in the midst of all that? He knows very well that he's loyal to Tom, and even though he's a big super fan of Chaor, it doesn't stop him from where his destiny lies. While it's still just a filler episode, it's definitely a filler episode you can't help but want to watch over if you're in for some silly and zany, and it does feel like an episode with some decent amount of humor into the mix of all that chaos. So, with Big Time, this was another episode that focused on the Danians, or one of the few that presents the Danian tribes. In this way, it also introduced us to the one leader that we had yet to see aside from the other Mepedian royals, the Danian Queen Alexia at the time. So when Sarah was going to go scan her, she found herself being roped into a surprisingly difficult mission of trying to save the queen, even though she kind of wound up being a partial damsel in distress. But it was just fun learning more about the Danians, especially because they didn't have as much screen time aside from battling during season 1, and they got a little bit more to show for it in season 2. But aside from that, we almost knew next to nothing about what the Danian queen was like. And boy, was it a surprise!
Foolish! Bring the human to me. I've seen images of humans, but never one face to face. Are they all this puny?
As well as that ending, especially of what we learned later on in Dangers of Diplomacy. And it was also cool to actually see Kaz use Stelgar in order to defeat his opponent, but it was just mostly the episode with the Danian Queen that seemed the most recognizable in this list. Thing about Bodil is the definition of don't judge a book by its cover. I mean, yeah, Bodil isn't exactly a powerhouse to say the least, but he definitely knows of how to pull a few tricks up his sleeve. Well, in season 1 anyway. In season 2, he's been just more of an information nugget for Tom and the crew. But putting that aside, one of the few times he actually shows of how capable he is, namely if he's stuck in Kiru City, is when he takes on Spider, an underworlder that is 5 times bigger than he is. And he was able to take the underworlder down simply by using a cyclance. And a pretty impressive shot, considering how much he was struggling with it. He also knew of how to get in and out around Kiru City, which definitely made him very useful. He knew how to play a very interesting game of whack-a-mole, that's for sure. And, of course, knows of how to be brutally honest with Tom. There's no secret that can be kept with that man. He is one with no filter, I can say that much. If there was ever an episode that could teach you a lesson about a few things, it would probably be Easy Win. One of the reasons I say that is because there's nothing wrong with playing nice, but as Peyton soon learns that sometimes the cure can be worse than the disease. In this case, he was trying to help a chaotic player named Lulu try to gain confidence in her abilities to fight because originally he wanted an easy drone win so he could fight Codemaster Imthor. However, he begins to grow guilty about the situation, and that seeing her struggle, he tries to give Lulu a chance to fight back. Slowly but surely, she begins to develop that said confidence. And, well, upon doing that confidence, she slowly began to realize that Peyton was starting to let her win. And understandably, she was upset. And the reason why this is a decent lesson is because sometimes when you're trying to be helpful and nice, sometimes it doesn't always help. It can sometimes hurt other people's esteem. I'm not saying you shouldn't help people, but you also shouldn't do it in a way that diminishes their abilities or make them feel patronized because of that said pity. And while Peyton lost at the end of a match, he did help Lulu feel a little bit more confident in her abilities to fight in the drones because, understandably, the reason why she was struggling in the first place was because she had trouble being in tune with creatures in general and learning out how to
be them, not just fighting them in a card strategy. Eye of a Storm was basically a changing point in Tom and Nadjarin's relationship to each other. While Nadjarin is the most secretive creature in Param, and understandably because now thinking about it, he is practically the oldest creature in all of Param, as well as the oldest mute in the overworld tribe. He knows a lot of secrets, and he doesn't fully trust chaotic players like Tom to keep it that way. He's very particular about that. But Tom, knowing the risks, was still enlisted help by Nadjarin, even though they've been going back and forth for quite some time. He knows Tom well enough to put faith in him when he's trying to go on an important mission of trying to save a group of Mepayans from being attacked by underworlders, which could make it very dangerous because the ritual in this storm, or the Eye of a Maelstrom lands, is basically where a music has to be given up to one of the eyes in the portal. It was supposed to be, according to Peyton, the portal to the Kafka itself, and is said to try to help stabilize the music, the one magical power source that changes the tides of battles in an instant. So, if that was messed up, you can imagine that this could not only spell trouble for the Mepayans, but all Param, thanks to these goobers. Yeah, apparently, now thinking about this, they really did not think this through, did they? But at the end of the day, when Tom managed to help Subject, the Mapayan Mute, finally do his work, but Nadrin finally allows Tom to get a scan of him. Not only does this show a huge amount of trust that Nadrin is putting into Tom, but it also means that it deepens the relationship further down the line, as we see in seasons 2 and 3.
Bug Out is the introduction episode to the Danian tribe, Sarah's favorite tribe in general, long before we figured out if they were color coded or not. One of the things I also liked about this episode is because we got introduced to Odu, Bathax, and Wama, actually two of my favorite Danian characters. With Wama, I liked of how laid back he is and the ideal buddy for Sarah, because it's very hard to actually befriend Danians when they have a queen to protect. They are extremely vigilant, and Udu Bathax is the living proof. He even went as far as threatening the others and even tried to come up with a solution to discourage chaotic players from going near Mount Pillar again. And sometimes after watching the Threshold of Destruction episode in season 3, I can understand why the creatures aren't exactly very big fans of chaotic players. Putting that aside, this created a very interesting, if not somewhat of an ethical situation of what does it mean to sacrifice and how to do it for the good of others. As a result, they came up with a very interesting plan where all four could get out very easily, until Peyton followed it up by getting caught. Castle Bodrin or Bust, parts 1 and 2, does give off a nice introduction to Mora Frafto as well as maxxor. Maxxor definitely proves of why he's the leader of the Overworlders. He wants to be sure everyone is safe, and he gets real when he says of how chaotic players just happen to be there causing a nuisance while all the tribes struggle to survive. And while Tom is a little hurt about his hero dissing him, especially with the sacrifice he pulled in part 1, it doesn't change the fact that this was an episode where Tom is put through some big changes into his character, namely recognizing of how to be very careful when it comes to Param and its dangers. We also get more of a taste in the political challenges that the creatures face on a daily basis between the tribes. And of course, we get to see of how maxxor is considered a good leader for the overworlders in general. While he wants to give the Kathaka to the overworlders, he decides to burn the map in hopes that the Kathaka would be better off in no hands than in the wrong hands, as he had said before, which definitely makes it a very admirable concept. It also highlights more of Tom's caring nature, that he would risk his own maxxor card in order to help a chaotic player, Reggie, retrieve a piece of himself that was lost in Param, especially after the poor boy had managed to get permanently paralyzed in the legs. So, overall, these were two episodes that were worth pairing together in this slot because you get a taste of all the politicals, a little bit of humor, and of course, you get to see the battle for Param in action. It's always crazy of how both Cass and Tom were the first two of a foursome to actually encounter their favorite creatures. Not only that, but the leaders of Param themselves. In this case, Cass was very lucky to actually encounter Chaor in the most diplomatic way possible, instead of being held up prisoner. However, he finds himself into a very dangerous game of politics. That's right. This episode also presents the politics of the underworlders, how they handle their power dynamics, and what makes Carrior a very effective leader. He keeps Von Blut around because he can. I don't know why he should have just passed that power to somebody else, namely Takinam, who probably proves to be a better second in command than Von Blut was. And another thing that I wished would have been mentioned later in the story or a little earlier was why Von Blut was willing to betray Chaor and why he was so driven into thinking that he could rule the underworld. Putting those plot points aside, one thing remains clear. This was probably Kaz's first time to actually get involved with some Param politics and being able to aid his hero, which is something we rarely now see in season 2 and 3. But putting that aside, it is pretty clear that Kaz really admires his hero, and Chaor definitely proves of why he's the leader of the Underworlders in the first place. He knew about Von Blut's treachery and played a very dicey game of tricks and betrayal, even though poor Kaz kind of got a little bit scared towards the end of the episode when he was facing with a very pissed off hero. But it definitely gave off a really great time seeing the two interact. It was both kind of sweet and silly at the same time. It was also nice that Hearing was a little involved into the politics by helping Kaz be introduced to his icon. One of the things that makes the Maze of Menace the best episode in Chaotic is where the stakes are high. You're actually worried about Tom's life as well as that of maxxor's. And on top of that, Tom actually is at his most heroic. The reason why I say this is because he is doing this 90% by himself with no battle gear, no help from other creatures except towards the end of the episode, and on top of all that, being able to outwit and outmaneuver two underworlders. both of the most powerful underworlders in existence, mind you. And as a result, it gave us a huge payoff, not only for Tom finally regaining the scan of maxxor, but also creating the ability to create a brand new friendship between the two, making Tom one of the best players in all of Chaotic. So, what do you guys think of this episode? And can you name another Chaotic episode that was pretty good in season 1? Stay tuned for season 2 episodes. And this is Dragon Videos signing off.